The day my son-in-law learned my silence had a price, that's the day he stopped smiling at me. I've been a patient man my whole life. Not soft, not foolish, patient. Most people never learn the difference until the bill comes due. My name is Walter Grady. I'm 64 years old, and I live alone in a brick ranch house on Coldwater Lane in Marietta, Georgia, the kind of street where the oaks have been there longer than the mortgages. I retired 3 years ago, after 31 years as a certified public accountant, the last 19 of them running my own small practice out of a converted storefront on Roswell Street. I built that reputation one tax season at a time, one handshake at a time, and men in this county still call me when they need a number they can trust. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what it means when a man like me finally stops being quiet. It was the 4th of July, and Georgia was doing what Georgia does in July. The air thick enough to chew, cicadas screaming in the pines like they were being paid by the decibel. I drove out to my daughter Renee's place on Chestnut Ridge, a newer development where the houses all look like they were poured from the same expensive mold, 3-car garage. Landscaping so manicured it looked embarrassed to be outside. I'd co-signed the loan on that garage 2 years back when Renee and her husband Marcus were still getting on their feet. Nobody had mentioned that loan to me in a long while. I grabbed the potato salad off the passenger seat, my late wife Carol's recipe, the one Renee used to beg me to make every summer when she was a girl, and I walked up to the door. Renee opened it before I could ring the bell. "Dad." She smiled at me the way you smile at a dentist appointment. Polite, managed. She'd been giving me that smile for close to 2 years now, ever since Marcus started running things. "Hey, sweetheart," I hugged her. She smelled like a perfume I didn't recognize, something sharp and expensive, not the vanilla stuff she used to wear in college. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind her, like he'd been waiting for his cue. Pressed white polo, sunglasses pushed up on his head even though we were indoors, that smile that never once reached his eyes in the 4 years I'd known him. "Walter." He shook my hand, gripped it a beat too hard and a beat too long, like he needed me to remember something about who was strong here. "Marcus." Dinner was out on the back patio, string lights already up for the fireworks later. A spread that Renee had clearly worked hard on. She'd even made Carol's potato salad recipe herself, from memory, and set mine right next to it like a peace offering neither of us would name out loud. I noticed that. I notice most things. It's the accountant in me. Numbers don't lie, but people do it constantly, and you learn to watch for the tell. We were maybe 15 minutes into the meal, sweet tea sweating on the table, when Marcus started warming up. He had a particular way of doing it, easing into his own importance slow and deliberate, like a man testing bathwater with his toe before he commits. "So, I don't know if Renee mentioned it," he said, cutting into his brisket with more ceremony than the moment required, "but we just landed the anchor investor for Grantwell Capital, officially as of Monday." Renee beamed at him. That beam. The one she used to give me when she brought home a report card. "That's a big deal," I said evenly. "How'd a firm like Grantwell end up looking twice at you?" Something flickered behind his eyes, quick, like a fish darting under ice. "Relationships," he said, smooth as the sweet tea. "You put in the years, you build the right network, doors open." "Relationships," I repeated. I picked up my fork, took a bite, chewed slow. I already knew exactly whose relationships had opened that door, and it wasn't his. Here's what nobody at that table knew yet. 4 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from Harold Nash, a man I'd done business with for over 20 years, the closest thing I had left to an old army buddy even though neither of us ever served a day. Harold ran client due diligence for Grantwell Capital's regional office, and he'd called me because my name had crossed his desk on an investor packet for something called Boyd Reyes Ventures LLC, a company I'd never heard of, sponsoring a young financial advisor named Marcus Reyes. My name, listed as a senior financial reference and independent auditor for a private equity pitch deck. I had never signed anything, never had a single conversation about it. Harold, being Harold, assumed I'd simply forgotten to mention I was consulting for my own son-in-law. He congratulated me, said it was a smart move, family looking out for family. I thanked him, hung up the phone, sat at my kitchen table for a solid 20 minutes without moving, without turning on the radio, just breathing, the way you do when you're deciding whether a thing is worth the fire it's about to cause. 31 years I spent building a name in this business. Men like Harold Nash vouch for people because my signature on a document used to mean something ironclad in 3 counties. And Marcus had folded that reputation up like a cocktail napkin and used it to leverage himself into a 7-figure investment. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call Renee. I did what I always do when something matters. I got quiet, and I waited for the right moment. I reached down beside my chair, where I'd set my leather portfolio, the same one I used to carry into every client meeting for 2 decades, and pulled out a folded document. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice level as a spirit level, I need to ask you about something. He glanced at the papers. His jaw tightened, just a hair. Renee looked between us. What is that? It's the investor packet for Boyd Ray's Ventures, I said, submitted to Grantwell Capital 3 weeks ago. I unfolded it slow, smoothed it flat on the table between the potato salads, right next to the section labeled Professional References and Independent Financial Oversight. I turned it so Marcus could read his own handiwork. My name's right here, page 6. Silence. The kind with weight to it. The kind that presses down on a table full of people who all suddenly forgot how to chew. Dad, what? Renee started. I never authorized this, I said, still calm. Still, even, the way I'd delivered bad audits to men twice my size for 3 decades. Marcus never asked me. Never mentioned Boyd Reyes existed. I found out because Harold Nash called to congratulate me on a company I've never set foot in. Marcus set down his fork with a small, deliberate click. Walter, look, it's not as simple as, I'm not finished. First time in my life I'd ever said those words at a family table. I want my name pulled from every filing, every packet, every version of that deck submitted to Grantwell. By Monday morning, in writing, from your attorney, copied to Harold Nash directly. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaled slow through his nose, that little recalibration breath I'd watched 100 nervous clients make right before they lied to my face about their deductions. Then he turned to Renee, and that's when I watched the whole thing shift, watched him make the calculation in real time, watched him pick his weapon. Renee, he said, voice going soft, wounded. Your father is trying to blow up the biggest opportunity of our lives. On the 4th of July. He let that sit in the fireworks-scented air. I don't know what I did to make him want to see us fail. That is not what's happening, I started. He worked 2 years on this deal, Dad. Renee's voice climbed, thin and shaking. 2 years, and you're going to walk in here tonight and tear it apart? He used my name without my permission, Renee. That's fraud. That's not a favor. That's not a reference. That's a federal securities filing with a forged endorsement on it. It's not forged. It's just... She stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence, because there wasn't a way to finish it that didn't sound exactly like what it was. She stood up from the table, so fast her chair scraped the flagstone. Renee had her mother's eyes when she was angry, wide and bright, and absolutely certain, and it about broke something in my chest to see Carol's eyes aimed at me like a loaded gun. You want to do this? Fine. Her voice cracked down the middle. Here's where we stand, Dad. You apologize to Marcus, right now, at this table. You tell him you support this family and this deal, or you can leave and you don't come back. Not to this house. Not to Thanksgiving. Not to anything. The patio went dead still. Even the cicadas seemed to hold off for a second. I looked at my daughter, the same girl I'd taught to ride a 2-wheeler on this same red Georgia clay, the same girl I'd sat beside in a hospital hallway for 6 hours the night her mother didn't make it, and I saw something I'd been refusing to see for 2 years running. She didn't need protecting from Marcus. She was standing shoulder to shoulder with him, aimed square at me. Marcus's smile had gone thin and satisfied, the smile of a man who'd watched someone fold 100 times before and was already counting on fold number 101. I stood up slow, looked my daughter dead in the eye. 4 words. Quiet. Clear. Final. Watch what happens next. I will. I folded the portfolio shut, picked my keys up off the table, and walked around the side of the house to my truck without looking back once. Behind me I heard Renee say my name, twice, the second time cracking in the middle, but I didn't turn around. Some doors you have to let slam all the way shut before anybody in the house understands what just left the building. They thought I drove home to nurse a wound. They had no idea I drove home to make one phone call. I got back to Coldwater Lane at 8:52 p.m. I know the time because I looked at the microwave clock the second I walked in, the way you do when something significant just ended and some part of your brain wants a timestamp on it for later. The fireworks hadn't started yet. My kitchen was dark and cool and quiet, and I stood in it for a long minute before I did anything at all. Then I sat down, at the same table where Carol and I used to do the bills every month for 30 years, and I called Harold Nash. "Harold," I said, "I need you to walk me through exactly what's in that Grantwell file. Everything with my name on it." Harold, God bless him, didn't ask a single unnecessary question. He'd been in due diligence long enough to know a man's tone when something was about to get serious. He read me the packet line by line over the next 40 minutes. My credentials. A summary bio of my career that had clearly been lifted, half accurate, half invented, off my old firm's website before I'd taken it down. A signature block with my name typed in, no wet signature, no notarization, nothing that would have held up under 30 seconds of scrutiny from anybody who bothered to check. "Walter," Harold said slowly, "if you're telling me you never authorized any of this, that's not a gray area. That's a material misrepresentation on an investor document. Grantwell's compliance department is going to want to talk to you directly." "Good," I said. "Give them my number." I hung up, and for the first time in about 2 years, I slept the whole night through. The rest of that week went the way I figured it would, which is to say quietly, and entirely without me lifting another finger. Grantwell's compliance officer called me Tuesday morning. I told her the truth, plain and complete, the way I've told the truth to the IRS more times than I can count. No, I never consented. No, I'd never met anyone named Marcus Reyes in a professional capacity. Yes, I'd be glad to send her the voicemail Harold left me, and yes, I'd be glad to put my statement in writing. By Wednesday, I heard through Harold, who heard it through somebody else, that Grantwell had frozen the disbursement pending an internal review of Boyd Ray's Ventures' entire reference file. Not just my name, all of it. Once compliance starts pulling one loose thread, they generally don't stop until the whole sweater's on the floor. Marcus called me 9 times that Wednesday. I watched the phone light up on the counter every time and let every single one of them ring through to voicemail. I made myself a pot of coffee. I read the paper. I went out back and refilled the bird feeder Carol used to keep full every summer of her life, and I watched a cardinal work through the sunflower seeds like the whole world wasn't currently rearranging itself 40 minutes away. Thursday, the calls stopped being from Marcus and started being from Renee. I let those go to voicemail too at first. Not out of spite. Out of the same instinct that's kept me solvent and steady for 64 years. You don't make a decision in the middle of somebody else's panic. You wait until the dust has enough weight to it that you can actually see what's underneath. Friday evening, there was a knock at my door instead of a phone call. Renee stood on my porch in the same sundress she'd worn to the 4th of July dinner, except it looked like she'd slept in it, or maybe hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were swollen. She was holding her phone in both hands like it might bite her. "Can I come in?" she said. Not really a question. I stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same chair she'd used since she was tall enough to reach it on her own, and for a long minute she didn't say anything, just turned that phone over and over in her hands like it was a stone she was trying to skip. "Grantwell pulled the whole deal," she finally said. "This morning. Not just your part, Dad. All of it. They're saying the entire reference section was fabricated. Marcus's old business partner's name is on there too, and he never gave permission either. Neither did his old professor from Georgia State, the one he's been using for 3 years on every pitch he's ever run. I let that sit. Didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago in this business that silence does more work than a lecture ever could. "He's been doing this for years, hasn't he?" she said. "And it wasn't really a question either. This wasn't the first time." "I don't know what he's done before you," I said. "I only know what he did to me." She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I'd set in front of her, stared into it like there was an answer down there somewhere. "You weren't attacking him at dinner. You were just telling the truth. And I." She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second. "I gave you an ultimatum, Dad. On the 4th of July, at my own table, in front of everybody, and you just stood up, said 4 words, and left. Yeah, I said. I did. I've been doing that to you my whole life, haven't I? Her voice had gone very quiet. Every time things got uncomfortable, every time I didn't want to hear something true, I made you choose between honesty and losing me, and you always chose me. She looked up, and her eyes were wet. I used to think that was love. It wasn't fair to you. It was never fair. There it was, the thing I'd been waiting the better part of 2 years to hear. Not because I needed it for my own sake. I'd stopped needing validation from anybody a long while back, somewhere around the year I turned 60. But because she needed to say it out loud, for herself, in her own voice, in her own kitchen memory of mine. No, I said carefully. It wasn't fair. She blinked, like she'd been braced for something softer. I love you, I told her. I have loved you every single day since the hospital handed you to me, including this past Tuesday and today. That's never once been in question, and it never will be. I leaned forward a little. But I made a mistake too, Renee, for a long time. Every time you threatened to walk away from me, I folded. Every single time, I told myself I was protecting you. What I was actually doing was teaching you that my boundaries didn't hold weight, that if you pushed hard enough, I'd move. She went very still. Marcus learned that lesson too, I said, probably from watching us do it for 20 years. That landed. I watched it land. She didn't flinch away from it, which told me she'd already been circling some version of that same thought on her own, probably somewhere around 3 in the morning, alone in a house with a husband who wasn't answering for what he'd done. So what do I do? She asked, and her voice was small in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. It was the smallness of a person sitting in the wreckage of a life they'd built on somebody else's forged signature, asking the first honest question they'd asked in years. That's not mine to answer, I said. That's yours. My phone buzzed on the counter. We both looked at it. Marcus Reyes. Renee's jaw went tight. He's called you all week, she said. I know. Are you going to pick up? I watched the screen until it went dark on its own. No. She almost smiled. Almost. A minute later, a voicemail notification popped up. I didn't reach for it, but Renee glanced at the phone and said, quiet. He called me 30 times between last night and this morning. The last few, he wasn't asking me anything anymore. Just talking. Telling me how much he'd sacrificed for us, how everybody in his life was turning on him, how I owed him loyalty no matter what he'd done. She shook her head slow. I'd heard him sell people things before. I'd never once heard him beg. It's a different sound entirely. People show you exactly who they are, I said, the moment the performance gets too expensive to keep running. She looked at me across that table, my daughter, 31 years old, sitting in the same chair she used to sit in on Sunday nights when she was 17, and we'd eat cereal for dinner and watch old westerns because her mother had passed that spring, and neither one of us had it in us to cook a real meal. I'm sorry, Dad. Not performed, not managed, just plain and real, the way an apology sounds when it actually costs the person something to say it out loud. I'm sorry for what I said to you on the 4th of July, and for everything underneath it, for years now. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I know. We sat like that a while, the coffee going cold between us, the cardinal working the feeder outside the window like nothing in the world had shifted at all. Marcus called twice more that night. The second one left a voicemail 3 minutes and changed long. I know because I played it once, alone, after Renee had finally gone home to pack a bag. He opened with justifications, moved through a stretch of explanations, landed somewhere in the middle on something that was shaped like an apology but wasn't one, not really, more like a request wearing an apology's clothes. He needed me to call Grantwell back. Needed me to clarify there'd been a misunderstanding. Needed me to tell them Marcus Reyes was a man of real integrity who'd simply moved too fast, gotten a little ahead of the paperwork in his eagerness. A man of integrity, from a voicemail left by a man who'd forged 3 separate professional references onto a federal investor packet. I deleted it. I've thought a good bit, these last few years, about what mercy actually looks like once you're past 60. When you're young, you think mercy means going soft. You think forgiveness means reopening every door you ever closed. And love means absorbing whatever gets thrown at you and coming back around still smiling. I don't believe that anymore, and I don't think Carol would have believed it either, not by the end. Renee came back to see me 2 days after that, and we talked longer this time, harder in places. She'd already met with a family law attorney on her own, no prompting from me. She was asking the right questions, making the hard calls herself, without handing them over to me, to carry on her behalf like she used to hand me every uncomfortable decision since she was 19 years old. That, more than anything else, is what told me she was going to come out the other side of this standing up straight. I told her she could call me any hour of any day, for anything real. What I didn't say out loud, because it didn't need saying, was that the door she thought she'd slammed shut on the 4th of July had never actually locked, not once, because I'm her father, and that part of the arrangement doesn't negotiate. Not now, not ever. But the version of me that used to fold every single time she pushed, that man retired for good somewhere between that dinner table and the drive home down Chestnut Ridge. Marcus called one final time the following Thursday morning, 7:20, before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. I looked at the name on the screen, sent it to voicemail without a second thought, and went on and made my eggs. Watched a pair of cardinals working the feeder in the gray morning light. Read the front section of the paper all the way through, the way I do every single morning of my life, rain or shine, forged signature or not. Some men beg loud, I've come to understand, because they've spent their whole lives mistaking a quiet man for a weak one. They never do learn, right up to the very end, that the quiet ones were the only ones in the room who knew exactly what they were holding the entire time.